Cool. All right. I just started the recording. So what I want to talk about today, I know I sent you a bunch of different topics, but I thought you have a lot of experience selecting dogs in a lot of different ways. And
Okay.
then our breed that the dogs we're breeding, they have like our club requires certain things to happen for them to be selected for breeding. And so what I kind of wanted to talk about today was just maybe we can have as broad or as narrow a conversation as you want. Like you said, you're interested in some of the Munsterlander stuff, so we can talk about that specifically, or we can just talk about like systems for dog selection. You know, you have experience with Schutzhund. I have tests that do like are similar for how we select dogs, and then you've done some selection in your prior work for like detection dogs, I think, right? And then you're still now, even with your labs, like evaluating candidates sometimes for like who's going to a pet home, who you're going to potentially sell as a detection prospect, right? Who you're going to keep, right? And so you have your own individual criteria. So we can talk about these like third party kind of standards or ways of testing this stuff, and then also like what we're looking for in our own dogs too.
Yeah.
So maybe
I
that's enough
thought,
of a frame and we can just go.
yeah. And I mean, I have put some thought into this recently. I was just thinking about you the other day. I went squirrel hunting because that's what I've got in season. And kind of right now, I've got my little Springer who I'm just trying to make my new kick around dog, for whatever else. And then you said last night that rabbit and woodcock were open and you were planning to get out for that. And so and I thought a lot about versatility recently it's, and it's come into play, at least that word and the way I think about it. And in the last Muncie I had in my class, I'm becoming more forgiving of things that kind of used to drive me bonkers before, especially with pointing dogs. And it's been the thought of like what true versatility is and how honestly, and I mean, I'm already heading just off track completely. But like, I had this setter in my last class who was the definition of like trial prospect. Just, second contact he had on a bad loose bird down here, hit it hard on his nose, didn't want to creep on it, styled up, dog just got very little bird contact behind him to that point. And he finished looking like what you expect, like just perfect. Now he's going to give the guy some other challenges because he's extremely independent and going to have a lot of run in him. And then I had this Muncie who I really like actually took every, all other than being maybe a little bit, this is something I might be interested in talking to you about too. I don't want to call it like frenetic, but just a lot of displaced energy at times. But like once we got it focused, really, really nice, easy to train, like launch your work on a check cord. Dog looked really nice. Not perfect, but nice. And then loose birds never really pointed at his own bird while he was in my
Yeah.
class, right?
Yeah.
Um and I was also a little bit trepidatious to like step in. I don't want to send a dog home after their kind of like basics class where I've intervened in manufactured point in the way I build a dog in my program. So sometimes it happens where I send a dog home that's not looking great on loose birds yet, but hopefully conceptually understands the things I've asked of them to this point. And then if they go have a lot of good wild bird contacts or even good pen raised bird contacts, it starts to set in. So bringing that back around to selection, it's kind of shaded the way I've thought of it recently because for me, outside of tracking a deer, the game I have available and what I enjoy doing is just small game hunting and like being out in the woods. I think about what the pastime means to me. And it's more, I really appreciate a good pointing dog work on woodcock, but I'm really limiting myself by saying I'm only going to go hit woodcock today because I've got tons of habitat for squirrel and rabbit in that same area. And so opposed to jumping in and out of the truck 6 times to go check on woodcock holes, I could just step out and satisfy myself, or get in the canoe and fish and shoot a squirrel out of the tree or do whatever. So this is what I appreciate about versatility in a dog, but you make compromises along the way in order to get that. I don't think necessarily that setter you'd want to put that dog on different types of game. And, and it may, I mean, he may go out and tree a squirrel for you, but at the end of the day, now that dog's at 300 yards and you don't know what's in his head, what he's after in regards to what you're pursuing. And it's a waste of all that beauty and style if what he's doing is going and running timber all day and not
Yeah, right.
pointing birds, right?
I gotcha. Yeah,
So
I think what drew me to the dogs that I have now was just living in Pennsylvania and knowing what we have available and knowing what my time frame is gonna be like. Because one of the worst parts about being a hunting dog trainer is you're often training dogs when you should be hunting.
I know, I
And
know.
so we've gone back and forth. We've had years where we purposefully kinda, like, cut our legs out from underneath of us in terms of how much money we made because we basically said, "We're not taking dogs during hunting season unless they're coming to hunt with us." Like, we'll take dogs in and do some conditioning and then take them on a trip or something like that, but then it really kinda cuts back when I'm not, like, selling a board and train program to somebody. But with these dogs, it's like I can go out, drive 7 minutes from my house, and there's stocked pheasants. Then in this big, like, piece of public land that's right there, one of the state game lands by my house, there's a creek that runs through the middle of it, and I can put up woodcock kind of, like, closer to that water area. There's another wet spot sort of back in the back where we put up some woodcock there too, and I shot a couple rabbits there and squirrels, and there's guys that deer hunt there, and usually they're happy to have somebody with a dog running through there because that might be the only way that any deer get pushed in their general direction if they're bow hunting. So that's the closest spot where I can run my dog, and I like that I have the option to do all of those things. And the compromise there is that it takes my dog a little bit longer to get good at switching gears maybe
Yes.
sometimes, or knowing, like, these are the rules when I get a nose full of this animal, you
Yeah.
know? And some of that I brought on myself because I do let my dogs chase rabbits. And if I would have just kind of made them point them and enforce similar steadiness rules on rabbits as I did on birds, then I think I would not have had so long where they're doing these things that they feel like are in conflict with each other. You know what I mean? It's like
And that's
then
I can see that being a tough one though, because I don't have access to pen raised rabbits to train on, right? So it's like it's a lot easier to develop steadiness when you have the ability to set up the context, and work it when you feel like it. And
I
it's like,
can't we can't do it too early either because our dogs, as part of their standard, are required to be sight loud or scent loud
mhm, mhm.
in pursuit of a rabbit. And so if I'm making them cap or I'm using obedience to restrain drive in those situations, then I'm probably not going to get the vocal. I'll get frustrated vocalization potentially, but I'm not getting what they're looking for as part of the breeding standard.
But even still, like obviously that leads you to other training scenarios that, where you have opportunities to maybe hit a rabbit pen with the Beagle guys, and it's something I need to look into. I wanna just I don't know what that means. Right now, it's the Springer that's getting all this because, like we talked about last time, I don't really have any testing or trialing plans for her, so I don't particularly care if I create a bunch of issues. My plan is not necessarily to have her out treeing squirrels, but so far I've just taken her still hunting and just trying to, it's a great opportunity to exercise that kind of suppression where we're in a field environment and you got to sit still. And she is really good at it, except her tail, she has zero control over. So, like, if I got to I got to clear the leaves out from around her tail before I sit her down.
Yeah, there you go.
It's just complete racket. But
We definitely try to hit up the rabbit pens or when we go to these puppy
yeah,
tests where they're holding that live rabbit tracking part typically at a beagle pen. Unless you're somewhere where there's enough like jackrabbits or wild cottontails that you can reliably get on them in a certain spot. Then
yeah,
sometimes they'll run them just on wild game, but generally we're in rabbit pen and then they are trapped and like relocated cottontails, or sometimes people are getting like San Juans or Tennessee redbacks and bringing them and putting them in there too. So it just depends, but what we've had to do sometimes at these tests is just tell people to show up a day or two early, because I've seen from like, we had a puppy from our one of our most recent litters test and didn't really get any rabbit exposure prior to that test. And the day that he ran, he scored very poorly on his rabbit track because he just
Sure.
hadn't been exposed.
Yeah.
And then when we brought him back in the pen to get his lout certification done, so making sure that he was loud on game, just the change from that first experience to that second experience, which was in the same day, it's
Yeah.
like that dog would have went up a predicate in his
Yeah.
scoring just from that one experience. And that's where, like, I think genetics come in, right? So
Well, so let me ask you this on, I'm interested. This is something I'm really interested in now with the Munsties is and any of the German breeds that are testing for rabbit work. How do you employ those dogs when you hunt? Because, with the Springer, my only real option is jump shooting. But you guys have this trailing and lout, and so you're allowing the trail, but I'm assuming they don't move like beagles. So I wonder how that works. Like,
no, what so yeah. So when we're hunting upland birds in like a prairie kind of environment,
yeah.
then my dogs have a hang on one second.
What do you think, bud?
Got something going on downstairs.
But well, since we're still recording, he may cut this out anyway. Um, you know, I personally think as I get older and I'm beginning to change and kind of experience my own personal change, like I'm enjoying, and I've talked about this in the past, like it's been a slow burn for me, but enjoying kind of staying home or at least appreciating my home grounds more, and that's something that Nate and I talked about. It's weird. There we are. I
Keep
just started.
talking. No, I heard what you were saying. Talk.
Well, it's weird to me. Like I got into this because I loved hunting so much, and like, I got my great buddy Stump, who's a fishing guide, is with like four of my clients, and we kind of end up exchanging clients. People get into the community, they get to know us, so they fish with him. I train their dogs. And then, there's probably 7 or 8 other people that are gonna join them over the course of the next 2 weeks, and they're up in the UP having a blast, and I'm the only person that had to stay home this time, right? And it's like, and it just and I always leave my 2-week window between my October and my November, or my September and my November class, but this time it was filled with family stuff. I got a kid playing soccer, and so I just made some decisions this time. We're all limited on time, but I will say, hunting dog trainer is probably one of the worst occupations for somebody that enjoys traveling to hunt in their leisure time, unless you really work hard to build it in to what you want to do. And I was bringing that around to like it's forced me to try to appreciate what I have access to here, and in some ways that's been a real benefit to me because I feel very comfortable hunting in my home range and kind of know what I have access to and know how to hunt the game I have here. But it's also made me less of like a strict bird dog enthusiast and made me think more about how I can be a more well-rounded, at least small game hunter. In the times that I mean, for me, deer hunting is going and sitting over a pile of corn in the back.
Yeah, I think
You
for
know?
me, it just comes out as being I'm just an opportunistic hunter.
Yes.
And I think at some point I would like to just be better, like more well rounded. And to me,
Yeah.
that means just more knowledgeable about all of the species. But a lot of times I wish I could tell you it was deeper than this, but I'm just taking a walk with my dog and I'm shooting whatever I can shoot when I
Yeah.
can, is kind of like what it turns into a lot of times. What I was trying to say earlier was in like a very obvious field environment where we have good wind and my dogs are running in like those prairie kind of environments, then they point birds like any other dog would. But when we are, and woodcock too, to some
Yeah.
degree, right? When we're
When you're in like
hunting,
woodcock cover, they kind of know. Yeah, I mean, I think, and not to cut you off, but all dogs, this is something we don't think about enough. Is like context determines so much of what we do, and dogs, we don't give them enough credit for being able to pick up on that.
I
People are
agree.
worried
Yes.
like if you expose them to this game, then they're going to pick the one they like the best, and that's no. You go into woodcock cover, they know they're hunting woodcock, or you're in, you have enough pheasant context in your released pheasant area, they're going to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. And then like we have what's basically an annual trip now to the Southwest to hunt quail and rabbits. And what I see in those environments, because most of the quail that we're hunting run a lot, we're hunting Gambel's quail and scaled quail. And so they'll hold if you have really good cover. But usually what's happening is your dog's tracking from one piece of cover to another piece of cover until the whole covey eventually gets up. And then you have a couple birds peel off, and then you can get nice pointing work. I'm not saying dog work on purpose
Yeah,
there, right? You get nice pointing work on singles and doubles.
sure.
But what I really like watching is my dog sticking with those tracks, and then over the seasons, and sometimes honestly just over a course of maybe even a week-long trip, watching these dogs go from bumping birds regularly to really watching them adjust themselves as scent gets hotter,
Yeah.
and then manage. And like my dog Aura, who is in training, sometimes it's obnoxious because I think she's an overthinker. And sometimes I think we talked about that before, but when I'm hunting with her, I see her very intentionally trying to manage the birds in front of her and the hunter behind her
Yeah.
when she's hunting, which I have grown to really appreciate a lot. And so we see that kind of stuff happen, where there's a lot of track in my dogs already, and so I admire that in situations where I see the utility. If that dog just locked up as soon as she hit scent, and
And
then I
waited
had
to
to
be
go and release
relocated.
her, those birds would be 100 yards away by the time I cut her loose again sometimes in
And
those
I
situations.
think yeah, and I mean, we have this very Americanized idea of what a bird dog is, and so when you go to a field trial, and I think throwdown birds, and what I mean by that are like pen raised quail trials, tend to set this expectation even more. So I think people from probably 50, 70 years ago that were doing a lot more wild bird trialing probably had a greater appreciation for what bird work is as opposed to just stopping and waiting on a relocation consistently. So, yeah, I mean, to me, and I think if you still go to Europe right now, like on the partridge trials, trailing, what we would look at and consider trailing to a stop to flush is commonplace and considered good bird work, right?
Yes.
So they'll actually call that a coulet if you're using the French language, where essentially the dog will point and then the handler and the dog are expected to basically walk in together with the dog kind of guiding the handler to the birds. Birds are birds rise, we get a good clean stop to flush with the shot and steadiness in that regard, and that could be a winning piece of bird work as opposed to pinning a bird, which, which is a good part of trailing. A good trailing dog can learn to pin a bird when you're not in the area, but it requires self-relocation, and sometimes people get a little sideways when they think that.
Yeah, and our testing system actually, the only way a dog, so like max score aside from certain things that you don't have control over, is a 10 in our first two tests, the VJP, which is the puppy test, and the HCP, which is the like mid-level test. Both of those are required for breeding, that the dog pass those. You can get a 10 in your pointing. The only way you can get an 11 is if judges can observe a bird moving on the ground and your dog relocating behind
That's
game,
cool. I like
right? So like it's required, and this, there's an issue sometimes where dogs are creeping and judges did not see the game actually move, and
you get
then
11.
yeah, right. So like it doesn't always go exactly right, but generally speaking, and that's why we have three judges too. So if somebody's like, oh, the dog's relocating, and then someone else says, oh, hey, did you actually see the game moving?
Yeah.
And then they say, oh no, then that's part of why there's so many judges in the field. But that's the only way that a dog can get that higher score there, is if they see that manners behind game. And so that's a thing that our testing system does acknowledge and shows appreciation for in the way it's scored.
Well, and I really appreciate that because I think from a generalist perspective, if you're out to put game in the bag, that's an effective way to do it. Like
Yeah.
it's rewarding, things that are are more effective than just what I would consider like kinetic confirmation and style on point, right? Which tend to be in terms of the aesthetic, you know, oftentimes, and I don't let me lump everybody there. I'm sure there are AKC and American field judges out there who know what savvy bird work looks like and are going to reward it. But I also think that there are people that would not appreciate that kind of work the way we're talking about it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I try to be really careful when I'm talking to people about the dogs that we have that I don't call them bird dogs. I refer to
Mhm.
them as versatile dogs on
Yes.
purpose, and
Yeah.
you'll see a lot of the folks with the dogs that are in the German, like, breeding systems, you'll see, like, a slogan a lot, "Truly versatile," and I think what they're just trying to say is, "We do more than just birds."
Yeah.
Right? Because like, you think about when I think of a bird dog, I'm thinking of upland, like, ground nesting bird species. And then when I
Yes.
think of, like, versatility, the way that maybe NAVDA would define it is my dog does that and hunts ducks. And
Yes.
then when I think of my dogs, I think of my dogs as they'll literally hunt anything.
Yes. As long as you expose them to it and
Right.
you
Right.
treat it like game, they'll treat it like game.
And you see that all the way up into including guys like Python Cowboy on
Yeah.
Instagram, who's got a drot that's ripping iguanas and stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
And
so
I think that that needs to be spotlighted more. I think, because I think we've said, and I want to make sure too, like, and I know I said this last time. NAVDA comes up a lot in our conversations. And I kind of thought about it after I got out. I was feeling a little guilty because, like, it sounds like we're just being critical of NAVDA. Like, I really appreciate that organization,
yeah,
and I
me too.
hope that it stays around for the long haul, and it's really the only game in town. But I want people to understand that, and I think it would be better for the breeds. I think it would be better for conservation. I think it would be better for, like, the general sportsman's community if we started thinking more holistically as small game hunters as opposed to just bird hunters, or at least some of us that appreciate versatility in our dogs. And that means going out and trying new things, not just going to the grouse woods for a week every year and that be your hunting. They give us the opportunity to hit these little pocket covers or what little access we have to public land around here and truly use the resources in a holistic fashion.
Yeah, and I agree. You know, I've spent probably most of my time in if I'm in a club training environment with my NAVDA chapters.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the organization enough that I was training director and then chapter president, so there's value there enough that I am trying to give back time and labor for those things. I think whenever I have things to say about it, it's just an opinion, right? So I have like a difference in opinion of what I want out of my dogs, I guess sometimes. And that just means that I do all of the stuff that I do with that organization and a little bit of other stuff, right? Is kind of the way I think of it, is like it's an addendum to that, not it's a difference in degree, not a difference in kind, I guess, is
Yes.
maybe a good way to say it. But the other thing that I'm concerned about sometimes is organizations can have, I don't know a better way to say it. So I'll just say like an identity crisis sometimes. And I
Mhm.
think when you try to serve multiple populations, you get in trouble sometimes, or when you try to branch out and do different things. I have this trouble when I'm doing programming for my own training company, is like I can't be everything to everybody. So I would try for a while to offer so many different services. And instead, it's just like, no, I do these four things really well. And so
Yeah.
that's all I'm going to do. And so when you have an organization that goes from a testing organization to then a testing organization plus a breed registry, when all of the breeds have their own clubs, breed clubs already that sort of manage that stuff. And then when you add in like the testing levels in a way where it seems like there's a little bit of borrowing back and forth maybe from like NAVDA and AKC with some of that stuff, and then you hear little like rumors and discussions about just trying to have ways that people come back and stay more involved. But when we're defining what more involved means, it means running more dogs and more tests.
Yeah.
Then it changes your purpose of the organization. That's why it's been really interesting listening to, and I don't want to make that again, I don't want to get this
I know.
too deep,
I know.
but listening like the different candidates that are talking about this stuff is like their their approach to this is one seems to be very much about like the business of NAVDA, And the other one seems to be very much about like, this is supposed to be the way that we evaluate dogs and their breeding and their trainability and their abilities, which speaks to me more because that's when I think about the topic that we're talking about now. Is the whole point of these things for me as a not super competitive person is saying like, do I have all of the raw materials in this dog that I want? And then is this dog proving to be a trainable dog in addition to a very like just naturally talented dog? And
Well,
so that's what I like personally.
I think you've made a really good argument there for specialization to some degree, and I probably needed to hear that because my constant mantra for the last 5 years has been, we're fragmenting too much, and we need bigger tent thinking. And I agree, I'm not saying that you're contradicting that necessarily, but I also do believe that's why we need breed clubs, and breed clubs, but it'd be great if there was continuity between the breed clubs enough that we all got to kind of cross-pollinate from an ideas perspective, and, but I agree. I mean, I also agree with your assessment of the state of NAVDA, and I had it's like you talked about the one being about the business of NAVDA necessarily, and the other being more about, like, essentially the mission of NAVDA. And protecting it, and I actually had a long chat with Jake the other day, and I you need to get him on one of these and just focus on the topic of cooperation. Don't talk about anything else. Just just get Jake on this thing and go, "Cooperation, go." Like, it is the most we talked for 2 hours about cooperation. And it was fascinating and a wonderful conversation. And that's the kind of thing he called to give me some advice on judges for St. Hubert this year. And we talked for 2 hours about cooperation. So, and barely touched on judges. So, it's, yeah, I mean, there are, it's all complex. The key is trying to allow the complexity without making it convoluted, I guess, when we think about keeping the dogs right, having a community, and all having a similar focus and not essentially not getting in each other's way.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there's a lot of examples of these organizations working cooperatively together, and so you can have like basically like a federation,
Yeah.
of these individual organizations, and the separations are less about disagreements and more about just preferences in terms of like the paint job your dog has or the particular kind of work you want them to do. And yeah, I think that the JGHV is a good example of that. I think the VHDF, if they can keep it up and running and going, is another good example of that. And
Does the
for them,
VHDF I'm not
Versatile Hunting Dog Federation.
do
So
they mess with fur at all in their testing or
I think you can. I don't know
okay,
if you have to, but you
gotcha.
can. And you can, to be clear, you can in
NADAs.
NAVDA also, if you want to do your drag, if instead of a duck, you could bring a bunny if you wanted to do a rabbit drag, which I would probably do in the future
Yeah.
for my own dogs. But VHDF, the most succinct and frankly uninformed way that I could describe it is they are the German tests for American bred dogs.
Yeah.
Like there's my understanding is there's blood tracking elements in there and other stuff. So and their
Basically, the dogs
scoring
that
is
don't
similar.
have yeah, the dogs that don't have pink papers are allowed to test there.
Yeah, so I like that, and what I really like about that is that they've kinda set it up where if you wanna have a club, they just call you like you're affiliated. And so it's not like you are a chapter of
Yeah.
this head organization. You can just you're your own thing, and you can happen to involve yourself in those tests, which is what I really like is I don't want to be beholden to a lot of governance necessarily there, but I want to be able to evaluate my dogs that way. It's the same thing for my pet dog training. I use AKC obedience standards
Yeah.
when I'm trying to describe to clients what we're doing. So when you
I
send a
think
dog to me for a month, I want to say like we're gonna meet the CGC skill set. And
Yes.
then like if they stay for 2 or 3 months, then maybe we can do like the companion dog, the novice obedience level skill set. And that just gives them, when you're talking to me or another trainer and deciding where you want to send your dog, I'm able to define scope and most people don't.
Now,
Right.
do you evaluate those dogs, or do you take them to be evaluated?
I feel very confident that I can get even the most rank
Yes.
to be able to pass like a CGC test. You can keep your shit together long enough to let somebody touch you and walk away or to walk past another dog. So I'm very confident in my abilities there. How how nice I get to be or how inductive versus compulsive I get to be in training for that might be a different discussion, but I feel like that bar is, it's high enough to be worthwhile and low enough that I'm not really they're very worried about it.
But do you organize evaluations for those clients?
Most of the time I'm seeing a dog at least once before I take them in, especially for our board and train. Like I'm not having a
No,
dog that's
I
sitting
mean,
there.
like, do you actually take them to a CGC test?
But yeah, so we'll evaluate them. So the one thing I'm trying to do better now though is
Yes.
I want someone else other than me, because I'm a CGC
Yeah, of
evaluator
course.
also. I want
Yeah,
someone else doing those tests, and that's just not always, the scheduling logistics are difficult for
of
that.
course.
But if I could, for my board and train programs, what I would like to have is infrastructure in place so that a dog comes here and I'm immediately taking them to the vet for a wellness visit, and just like that's a wellness certificate the day
Yes.
they get dropped off. What we do right now is like we're taking weight and doing a full once over on the body. We're noting lumps and bumps and things like that. Just like if you get a rental car, you know what I mean? You're gonna like, I didn't do this kind of thing, right? It's like where you start. Uh, and then, but I would like to have that be like a independent assessment from a vet. And then on the back end, what I would like to have is like the day that dog graduates from that program, I have like my buddy who lives 45 minutes away from me. He's the one that does the evaluations. I just don't have that scheduling in place yet, but that's where
Yeah,
I'd
it's
like
a
to go.
challenge. But I
The point I
yeah,
was getting at though, real quick before I lose it, is I value the AKC standards as a standard that I can train dogs to. There isn't much else that I like about AKC except maybe their legislative watchdog arm. I like that too, but like my general opinion about that organization is it's where working breeds go to die.
yes.
And I also feel like it's an organization that has been like dying a slow death for a long period of time, and the consequence of that is like you look at the obedience standards, they keep dropping. So what AKC novice is now is not what it used to
Is
be,
that right? I didn't
and
know
that's
that.
because, yeah, so like they used to do off leash group stays in novice, and they don't do that anymore because too many dogs were getting in fights.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like you should just expel that dog immediately if that happens, and then let other people move on with having that higher standard, instead of this thing where I think now you put them in a stay and you like walk across the ring to get your leash and go back to the dog. It's like very short compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, that's and I mean, you're evaluating for temperament there too, and like you can only have, I mean, like you said, I mean, a guy like you can get a really ranked dog through something like that, but at the end of the day, it's a temperament evaluation as well,
Yes.
and we can only have so much environmental impact on as far as temperament's concerned. You know, it's there's always going to be the guy that he just can't stand it, you know, and he's gonna bust wide open. And so, but you would know, you know, a guy like you would know before you took that dog to that particular evaluation and say like, hey, this just ain't the evaluation for this dog, you know, like. But I mean all that to get to objective standards in general and kind of bring it back into gun dogs. I mean, I think that for my program, I think that would be very helpful to me because I don't like necessarily structured, and I've been critiqued for this. I don't like structured training plans, but I
Yeah.
do like objective standards. And so I think that you can supplant, or it would give me breathing room on trying to explain to people like I don't have a plan for your dog, I just have objectives for your dog. You know, and you know if we meet that objective standard, then that should hopefully satisfy those people that struggle with not having a plan.
This is the same thing. There's parallels in the training itself. So I think it's fine for people that know what they're doing to just say, I have an end goal. I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there, but I'm confident that I'll get there. And then, for like a new person, like a client that you're working with, they may need a lot
They need
more of a
structure.
step
Yeah.
by step structured training program. And we see this in the dogs too. When we talk about like free shaping behaviors, what we're basically saying is I'm telling the dog when they've done it right, but I'm not giving them any other information about how to get there. And what you get from them often is really creative problem
Yeah.
solving.
You're making superstitious stuff happen.
Yeah, that can also happen. Yeah, right. And then the other way is if I take this very prescribed, whether I'm luring or molding dogs into positions, then I'm sort of doing like I would call it like map-based training. I'm putting the X on where the treasure is, and then you figure out how to get there. Or we're doing GPS style training where I'm telling you turn by turn exactly
Yeah.
how I want you to get there.
Yeah.
And so what you get is sort of the same outcomes that you would get from trying to navigate in real life your way through those things. Is if you know what your destination is, but I give you a lot of freedom to find your way there, you you're you're going to get very confident in your ability to meet that goal, even if it's not the most efficient way, or there's a bunch of other ways you could do it. And you talk about superstitions
think
getting built
I think
there.
of efficiency comes on, right? I think the dog becomes a really good route planner themselves, right? Like when you give like free shaping versus luring and rewarding, I think there is a marked benefit to cheater shaping. I don't believe really that the free shaping necessarily exists outside of a Skinner box. But yeah, the less information you can provide the dog with early, then down the road those dogs get really really good, not only at being creative, but they've created neural pathways to like problem solve and create,
Yes.
and
Yes.
do it on their train themselves essentially to some degree.
Yes, and then you see from the other side, like sometimes I need you to do this a certain way, and
Yes.
then it's helpful to just kind of have a process of training for those things that doesn't leave a lot of open doors that the dog could walk through. There's just one prescribed way to do it, but the cost of that is the same thing that happens when you use your GPS is you kind of become a little helpless without it. And so there's a balance there between those two things,
And
right?
we're describing that only in the context of reward-based training, essentially the way we're talking. But, I think you're right. I mean, what people want from me is a GPS dog, and I get there compulsively most times. You know what I mean? And it's like because it's that's the most manageable.
What most clients are asking for when
Yeah.
if I were to interview them and without talking about how we're going to approach training, what most people are asking for an end product is most likely I would give them what they want by an escape avoidance training
Yes.
program.
Yeah.
What most people tell you that they want, if you're going to let them dictate how you train, is
Yeah.
they want a dog that would look like the product of escape avoidance training, but they want you to do it
In a
like with
reward-based system.
reward only free shaping, right? Like that's what they want. And so this is part of why we train the way that we do now is because I think what you get is still relatively compulsive or escape avoidance based training program, but the dog looks like they were trained with a reward based program because they kind of have been trained with both.
Well, yeah, and I mean that is what we're describing essentially is that kind of buzzword balance training, right? Is people that have the ability to work in multiple paradigms, and for me personally, I think they work best when you develop them in separate context and then blend them down the road in training.
And I can tie this back to the standard thing, even though we got off on a little tangent here, is in our standards, there's places where it says the dog is supposed to do something like bring game back to you happily.
Yeah.
Or they'll use some sort of adjective that says the dog can't look or isn't supposed to look
Yeah.
suppressed or like they're doing this under duress
Yes.
in those situations. And so it's helpful sometimes because we know if we want reliability, then to some degree it is under duress.
Yes.
You're making it clear that like there are consequences for not doing this, but I need you to look like you enjoy this. And the cool thing about dogs is that it's very hard to get them to look because the way that they look is
Usually how they
a
feel.
physical manifestation of their emotional state, right? And so it's hard to get them to look in a way that is incongruent with how they're actually feeling,
Yes.
right? And so
I would argue that being a competent reward-based trainer will allow you to, and I'm trying to think of a better way to say this, but to certainly will allow you to employ pressure in ways down the road in training that you might not be able to otherwise. Like,
I think when you're talking about a trainer's development, though, if they start out a reward based trainer and they get very good at that side, and then you try to get them to learn the dark arts,
yeah,
then they have a lot of trouble doing that
yes,
because they're going to see that aesthetic that they're used to go away, at
right,
least for periods of time. Meanwhile, if you approach it the way I did, where it was like, we're doing escape avoidance training first, and then you become pretty good at using rewards, I'm like, I can have all of the reliability and my dog can look like they're loving every minute of this. This is fantastic.
yeah, and I mean, I agree. It's interesting because, and we've talked. I mean, we're kind of repeating a similar conversation about how I, with my client dogs, rarely use formal reward based systems, but have gotten pretty good at managing attitude simply through access to I use a lot of play and obviously game and toys and things like that in training. So arguably it is reward-based training. It's just not formalized in the way we would think of a marker system.
There's a point in the process too that I have a hard time describing to people, but like in everything that you're training where the reward becomes less about it's the consequence for the dog doing the right thing because I just expect you to do the right thing repeatedly, but I have to pay you often enough that you want to stay invested in the work. And so what it really comes down to then is rewards happen as a way of attitude management more than it's it's so much about operant conditioning. So like we get to a point in early bird work with dogs where I'm not shooting a lot of birds for them and they're seeing a lot of birds fly away.
Yeah.
And then what you start seeing is with a lot of those dogs early in their work, right? The attitude go, oh man, I'm not
Yeah.
getting my prize enough, right?
Yeah.
They get frumpy. And so that's when you shoot a bird for them and then
Yeah.
it picks them back up. And so this was a really important thing that I probably heard from Pat Nolan first, at least the way I'm going to say it, is like you put more reinforcement on the things that are not good. Everybody thinks about rewarding when the dog does something well, and it's like, no, you pay the things that are garbage, and that's how they become better. Like you create relevance for the dog and you build that up. And then once you have well established behavior, then what I'm trying to do is
Shape.
just give you enough that you
Yeah.
keep playing the game. You've talked about this in one of your earlier podcasts about like not putting too many birds out if you're going to go do preserve stuff with your dogs. I think you said
Yes.
something like maybe one every 2 acres, or you want,
It's a huge part of my turnover because so many of my clients preserve hunt, and it's adjusting to what a preserve hunt is to those people. And it's like, if you really appreciate the dog work, if what you're in this for is not to go home with the 20 birds you paid for, but to enjoy the day afield with your dog, then the best way to achieve that is to plant very lightly, expect to lose birds, and only put a few birds out per set and have multiple sets in a day. And that way you're ensuring, a bird in order to act right needs to be able to perceive the pressure from the dog and have the ability to escape it. If you don't have those two things, and so many times in a preserve hunt, they don't exist, right? Like, and so you end up rewarding shoddy bird work from the dog by, having bad.
can we talk a little bit about the different, I guess, venues that we have experience in where you're using performance tests to evaluate dogs for breeding or for selection of work,
Yes.
right? So like you have experience in Schutzen that I'm interested in sort of hearing about, like where what historically was being evaluated, and are there things that were more procedural, like in the sense of like can the dog track, and then are there things where it's less, or I guess maybe you could say more subjective, like when we talk about like does this dog have heart, or like where's this dog's bottom, right? So like the stuff where we talked about, like Tess should have a thing where the dog gets punched in the mouth a little bit. And then we got like they're given a problem that they're not really prepared for. And we want to see if that dog has enough heart to like or stick to itiveness or whatever we want to call it to like figure it out. And so can you like speak to some of that stuff in the venues that you've participated in?
Yeah. And so I'm going to try to start by setting the big stage before we start breaking it down, when in that so much of the way I select or what I look for in gun dogs was informed by protection sport work. And I do think Schutzhund, as opposed to the other protection sports I played, maybe took the idea of breed selection more seriously than the other games I played, even though they all, to some extent, existed as breed selection and have been used that way. Schutzen really started that. It's German in its nature, and they love breed evaluation, and that's what they're aiming for. And so when you specifically talk about tracking, I've got to give a little disclaimer that one of the reasons I quit playing Schutzen early is because I just did not have the patience for tracking. I hated it. I hated training for it. And what I learned later, after I kind of left Schutzen and never went back to it, was that tracking is not tracking. Tracking is a big obedience routine, essentially. Like once you get, in the context of a Schutzen track, right?
Yes.
So it's very precise footstep tracking. You have to start from a place of drive, just very similar. If we think about it in comparison to developing a bird dog, it's like I'm going out early and I'm allowing sloppy work with drive building in mind, or with drive expression in mind. And then I slowly limit access to what the dog finds reinforcing and make them work harder to achieve it. And in the case of Schutzen tracking, that is slow, methodical, very precise look. And honestly, like one of the great Schutzen trackers, guys that really like perform at a high level, and ladies at the FH level, they're masters of motivation, in that they want to drive the value of the reinforcer down. Or let me say it this way, they're going to take a reinforcer, make it arguably less valuable, but increase the dog's desire for that lower value item. So it's like you may start with a bunch of food on the track, and then eventually, like, a great FH dog could run 100 FH tracks in a row without a reward. Essentially, the reward becomes the work, right? And so those people are the masters of like that. The dog getting some sort of intrinsic reward out of actually performing the work, which I think we've discussed in the past. Like finding an article and just downing for it, and then being released out of that down is exciting to that dog. Hitting that right turn is exciting to that dog. Right angle turn, 90 degree. And so that requires, when we think from a selection point of view, it's like a dog that has what I would consider like a lot of bottom for staying in a state of motivation while performing like highly precise work in a methodical way. That doesn't reward certain types of dogs very well. And then the people that, like, if you take an Ivan Balabanov who takes very high drive mals, what I would consider sporty mals, and turns them into like beautiful tracking dogs, as opposed to somebody that takes a shepherd that has more of a methodical nature, then it shows you the contrast there. It shows you what can be accomplished with training. Whereas when you think of like Mal, I think frenetic, need for, very like prey on the extreme end, and food on the extreme end. And so it's like funneling that all into this very like concentrated, focused attention on this very specific task is hard. Yeah. So personally, from a selection perspective, if I wanted a great tracking dog, I would be looking more to what I think like Munster, when you compare it to DD or GSP or Kurtzar, like to me, what I see out of the Munsters, they tend to look more like tracking dogs in my head, because they tend to, even if have some frenetic, they tend to, when they get focused, they internalize things very, very well and stay focused in something where some of the other ones may need. And this is, I mean, this is all, I haven't tested specifically for this, but I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
making, general mention. Let's see if I can bring that back to life. The battery. Okay. Well, we'll just put this guy right over. I don't even know how to turn this damn thing off. How about that?
New
Let's see if it'll
equipment woes.
God, there we go. We'll just go back. Yep, back to my old bunk. You got video of me?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Back to my old bunk things. So I went deep on I went a little too far afield on like what tracking is and stuff like that. But I think selection is completely determined by like what you're comfortable training necessarily. So a guy like Ivan's going to have, he's just going to have a lot more tolerance for that extreme expression of prey, where when you look at your people that like the old school type GSD more, they wanted a more what they would consider a balanced dog, which was like enough prey to get to start your basics, and then in your protection work you could tap into defense to get that work more, right? But then at the same time, like when you work in food, those dogs tend to lend themselves to like slowing down and being maybe more a thoughtful type of dog. And in terms of like washing things out, that's a pretty hard one. One thing I've, especially like in puppy selection, I personally have quit selecting individual puppies at all. And I'm only picking litters anymore. And I just take whatever dog I get out of it. And that just came from having enough washouts, but over time of like selecting what I thought was the best puppy in the world and it wasn't great. And then seeing puppies from other litters that just having enough exposure to this stuff, seeing puppies in other litters that I maybe didn't think looked great when compared to its litter mates at 8 weeks old, but turned into a very nice dog down the road. And what I would see is like uniformity is much more valuable than outliers.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that is the intended goal of
Yes.
the breed selection process that like our dogs have, is not that you produce like this one stellar dog out of the litter, but more that you can pick any dog out of that litter and they're going to be very functional for their intended purpose. What I would say is having that backdrop, I think we've had pretty good like luck with doing temperament testing. And
Hmm.
so this is less like the ability to do the particular like working tasks and
Yes.
more just like that dog's temperament, those things holding true when we are doing those evaluations with our litters at like 7 to 8 weeks old, and
Yes.
then who they end up being when they're older. Like when you see those dogs, barring maybe they're going through a fear period at the time that
Yes.
we're doing those evaluations, the steady Eddie dog tends to stay that way.
Well,
And the dog that was easily frustrated tends to stay that way. And the dog that had a more or less pronounced startle response
yes.
tended to stay that way. And so those things, like my mentor Linda is always very careful to say, like, you are measuring that dog at a moment in time. So you have
Yes.
to take it's valuable data, but you have to also take it with a grain of salt. But it does seem like it's held mostly true.
And I would say that that is my number one criteria across the board. Like, I don't like spooky. I don't like aggressive. I think temperament is indicative of much more. It allows, I think most dogs are going to be born with the instincts that they're gifted by their DNA. The issue becomes, do they have the temperament to allow the expression of those?
That's a really, really good way to put that.
And, and so, yes, like, I don't like I mean, I will pass on what I thought would be a good litter if I don't like the general vibe of the temperament amongst the litter. I don't like outliers anymore at all in puppies. And you gotta make room for that. Like, if you have 10 puppies and there's one high and one low, that's fine. That's not telling me so much about the litter, but if I go in there and it's a hodgepodge, I'm less comfortable with it, but yeah, what I mean, at the end of the day, what I'd really like to see is like, a puppy that doesn't get worked up when I pick them up, doesn't have a panic attack. Now I'm going to make allowances for like if I'm picking a Mal or a pit bull or, even a pointer setter versus a lab. When I go in with my labs, I really want to see like them yield to I don't like them fighting and their Volhart on their back stuff. And, I just want you to accept, take what you get. Just enjoy the fact that I'm touching you. But yeah, like consistency is extremely important to me, and temperament is pretty much the only thing I care about in evaluation.
You
You
see
know?
you see differences in opinion on how to how to raise puppies based on some of the stuff that you just said. So like for instance, you see some guys that really want the breeder to be mostly hands off with those dogs from like birth to 8 weeks so that they can say like this is just who this dog
Yeah,
is
they didn't get born.
absent any like finagling from a person. And then for us, we're looking at it like if we made the choice to produce this litter, then my obligation to each person that's getting a dog from this litter and to that puppy themselves is we're going to start working with them intensively as early as we can. I mean, some of that stuff is starting in the whelping
And
box.
there's a lot of research that suggests that there's validity to that. I mean, my personal opinion, based on my anecdotal experiences, I don't care as much about it, but I understand why people do it. I don't knock it. I never knock it. But I've had enough success with litters I wasn't able to put the time into, and had enough failure with litters that I gave a lot of effort to. But again, at the end of the day, I think it's always got to be we can never only think in terms of nurture, and we can never only think in terms of nature.
I think I heard Ivan say on some podcast or something one time that he's done like the Army Super Dog stuff. So like the
Yes.
ENS and early scent introduction, right? Those things which we do with our puppies. He said he's done it with litters and not done it with litters. And he was like, I don't really feel like it mattered at all.
I kind of I'd say anecdotally, I have the same experience with Ivan. Like I've been involved in research projects when I was working for other companies where we intensive litter work stuff, exposing to odor and things like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I just didn't. It's not that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I just because I don't think I think there's always value anytime you're willing to give effort and put time into anything. But that being said, I you know I'm not convinced that your nurture is going to overcome any nature.
Yeah. I think this is another place where like there's a variety of prescribed ways to do this stuff. And then as you get more experience, you're just kind of like the general things I need to do are stress inoculation. So like
Yes.
I need to mildly stress these dogs in ways that are not overwhelming or traumatizing for them, but basically get them to learn to deal with those things. And that's physical and emotional. And then for us, like proprioception is a really big thing. So trying to have these puppies walking on unstable surfaces, losing their balance and having to regain it and doing those sorts of things. My favorite way, this is a Linda thing too, is she's like, you're trying to teach that dog that each limb comes out of a different hole and they can operate them independently from one another, right? Is like
Yeah. Yeah.
that stuff's really important. I've seen with our dogs, and again, it is anecdotal, like a direct correlation, in my opinion, of some of that early proprioception work. And then when they start swimming, we don't get any of these dogs where their butt sinks and they kind of like are paddling and splashing water.
That to me is like that's a really interesting parallel or a really interesting correlation that I'd be like that's worth more
Dude,
looking into.
every puppy that because when we don't do this stuff where like we're gonna let you just wade in the water and follow mom most of the time, I'm in waders and I'm picking puppies up and I'm setting them
Interesting.
down in the water and letting them swim back to shore. So we use like this framework of pressure release reward for everything that we do, including that. So I put you in the water. I'll support you if I need to a little bit, but you basically are swimming back to land. So that's your release of pressure. And then Gretchen's there with some reward, whether that's praise and petting, some affection, or food or a toy or
Park on
whatever.
that. Yeah, park on that for a second because like personally I got zero issue with that. But for people listening, and I don't know if anybody's ever heard that, like that could be a major no-no to other people.
Yeah.
And I've heard people talk like never, especially being around retriever people. It's like it should always be the dog's idea to enter the water first. You never do the thing you just said because you're teaching them to swim to shore. I think when I've heard that in the past, I said, well, that sounds like bullshit. Like, I think the dog is going to be confident or they're not. But I think mechanically starting fully submerged or submersed the way you're talking about With a puppy, I think that they're just gonna instinctively do the thing they need to do and not panic.
Yeah, have you watched people teach their babies to, like, not drown?
We
Have you
do
watched
we did
any of
it
those?
with our kid, yeah, when he
Yeah,
was an infant, and it was
just like,
amazing.
you're just pitching that kid in the water and being like, "Sink or swim, bud, figure it out."
I had to, like, close my eyes at time. The lady that ran the thing, I mean, just chuck my infant child into the pool, and, like, and the cool part was, like, because he didn't have this there was no history. It was like pure reptilian brain took over, and he just flapped over on his back and would breathe.
This is what happens, is what I think people don't think about when they say stuff like that is you are potentially giving that dog many repetitions where they get to refuse to do something, or they get to say, I don't feel great about this and I'm going to avoid it. And so it's like, to me, in those situations, sometimes this happens a lot.
You create more anxiety than you
A lot,
alleviate.
right? A lot of my experience with this is informed by working like spooky pet dogs, that
Yes.
everything new they go, I don't want to do this. And with those dogs, usually the answer is to not peel that band-aid off slow so it rips every individual hair out, like, one at a time. It's to rip the damn band-aid off
Well, and it's
and then
funny 'cause
go on
I've
with
got
life.
yeah, and I've got my own system, which is kind of a hybrid, and it's usually I'm gonna give the dog the opportunity to go first, but I immediately, the moment I see I'm really big on not beating a dead horse in training, and what I mean by that is if I see something that the dog is averse to, I'm not gonna take them back to it and let them experience that aversion over and over again, or that sensation over and over again. And so for me, as opposed to walking the dog in and having them swim back, it's like if because I'd say, depends on what breeds I'm working with, but I do almost all of my water work happens in the summertime here. And instead of waders, I'm just out there in my skivvies in the pond in the backyard. And so it's like the moment you show me you have an aversion to entering the water, I just put a long line on you. I go out. And then usually a lot of times when I'm out there to the front, that alleviates it and they come on in. And then sometimes it means I've got to start using some pressure. And so I'm using it on the entry first. And it's not that I'm dragging you in. I'll never drag the dog in because immediately my brain says opposition reflex. I'm creating something. But what I will do is just not give you escapes. Like, you know what I mean? And so it's just, and then, sometimes I'll use a pinch or a prong in that scenario too. And it's like, I'm creating enough stress to make this path feel less stressful.
If I think about it, I think we're probably doing something similar to you, because we probably do dump all the puppies out with one or two of the older females. And then if they want to get in the water, they do. But we're doing what we're, if we're there by the water with those puppies, we're there for a swimming day. And
Yeah.
so
We're not
they're either swimming on their own
yeah.
or we do the same thing. So I
Yeah.
guess it's probably more similar than different.
But yeah, I mean, I think any chance to self-discover something's a good, it doesn't make it, I don't, it's just what the way my brain works. I mean, it's not yeah, I hadn't particularly thought that out. It just feels right to me, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if they're going to enter on their own, I'd rather that. But yeah, I don't have this big hang up on, you know, compelling the dog to water that
Yeah.
other people do, you
But
know?
that one piece, I think out of all of the things that we do, just a lot of the early navigation of obstacles and things has, to me, seems like we just don't have any dogs that don't know how to use their back legs in the water.
I do agree. Like I said, I think that when you hit it, I think they call it ISR, the infant swimming rescue thing, whatever. I can't remember what it was, but yeah. I mean, when I watched my kid do that, it was a very apparent to me that the body knows what to do without being trained in that scenario. And I think for puppies, that is probably the exact same mechanism. And so if they get the opportunity to rehearse that with properly with proper mechanics, then we don't give them the opportunity to rehearse it with improper mechanics later, where they're looking for the bottom. That's why to me, that's why that not being on plane thing happens, is they go into the water and they're searching for the bottom with their rear legs
Yeah,
most times. Yeah,
yeah.
every once in a while you get a super dense, weird breed that just doesn't, like that doesn't look right in the
Like,
water.
I feel like that's every setter I've ever seen try to swim, at least
A
when they
lot of
start
that.
out.
Nothing has bigger eyes than a setter trying to swim for the first time.
I think so. Part of this temperament stuff, though, I think is maybe the one piece when I'm looking at these tests that it's like in our testing system, it's evaluated, but maybe it's just not possible to evaluate thoroughly enough, right? So, like on ours, you do all your performance testing stuff, and then they're checking teeth and eyes and testicles and all that sort of stuff, and then part of that is an evaluation of the temperament, but it's basically just one a checkbox. You pick
Yeah,
like lively or pretty neutral or averse, or you know what I mean? It's
and
like
it's like,
that's all it is.
this is where the part of me, it's like, I got 2 wolves, right? And in my head, and one is like we talked about last time, we're gonna try not to use highfalutin language. And I do have that part of me that like wants to put things in organized boxes and use this very specific behavioral vernacular. And then there's the the probably the more real me, which is, kind of a redneck that goes, it's gonna work or it ain't, and 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 I have been, on those research projects. One of the bigger things that for me was I was with these grad students from Duke, arguably brilliant people, complete nincompoops when it came to anything dog training related, right? They were in this behavioral psychology department. They could talk the talk, absolutely. But when it came time to like teach them how to clicker train, they were absolutely lost. And of course, they were not interested at all in anything aversive. They had already had this preconceived notion that any sort of pain and training's, unethical and immoral. But it's like it gave me this contrast. And so they were the ones doing this puppy evaluation thing. They couldn't look at it. They had no idea, right? Like it was just they had no experience to base what they were looking at on, and they were so deeply immersed in their academic biases that they couldn't just see the real thing that was happening on the ground. And so I think there's a part of us that I trust more of, I know it when I see it, and they pass this objective standard, right? And that's one of the struggles I've always had with testing in general is like, so many good dogs get washed and so many great dogs or bad dogs do well. But at the end of the day, I think we have to blend some of that, to some degree, because we have to be able to explain it. We have to be able to show our work and show what we mean by it.
I see in the interactions that the judges have with the dogs too is like it was a thing that I have a conflicted opinion on because like you see some dogs the way that they reach to open a dog's mouth.
Yeah.
It's like they're kind of like I was like I want to see that you are actually having to exercise restraint
Yes.
and not wanting to bite me or flail around or whatever
Yeah.
the case may
Yeah.
be. And then you see other ones that like I would say they handle a dog more appropriately,
Yeah.
right? And so this is like a constant conflict I have when I'm talking to people about trying to wear a hat from like a trainer perspective and then from a breeder perspective is the trainer in me says I I can understand why the dog responded the way they did given the way that you interacted with them. And then the breeder part of you is like, I want the dog to be as foolproof as possible. And
And
so if
that's
you have a good temperament, I shouldn't have to we're not getting in a fight no matter how rough I'm getting with you
and
and you open your mouth.
Now I gotta say, like, there have been many times where I looked in a dog's mouth and my objective was not to see what their bite looked like. It was to see
Yeah.
what their temperament was,
Right.
right? Like, and it's an interesting thing you say that, and I'm not a NAVHDA judge. I probably never will be. But if I was one and I hadn't just heard what you had to say right there, I would probably be checking temperament every time I looked in a dog's mouth. And that's not fair, right?
Yeah.
So
You
yeah,
saw, I saw this, or it was a discussion that came up when I was running my dog in the VGP test too, which is not at that point. That test is for funsies and bragging rights. I guess it's not like required necessarily to breed your dog, but there's a lot of decision making that judges can make about order of events that can
yeah,
really impact
yeah,
how well the dog works. It's like some people go into that and they're like, we're going to do a bunch of these kill subjects
yeah,
first
yeah,
because if this doesn't work in your favor, you're out. And then my day is shorter. Right. And then you can have folks that like are trying to do this in a way so they're setting the dog up for success to some degree. Like like for the test that I ran, we did our search without a duck first and then did a duck search after that. So the dog was expected to search this big body of water and there was nothing in there for them to find. And so you could see how potentially if a dog just did a big old search and turned up nothing, then if you're going to go to a new body of water and ask them to do the same thing right after that, some dogs maybe wouldn't be super interested in doing that, especially if it was the 20th thing they did that day.
Yeah.
So you see that kind of stuff play out that way sometimes too. So those things are all it's very interesting to me because that test to me was really a temperament test as much as it was like temperament and obedience as much as it was any sort of ability that the dog had, right? Like they needed to be.
Kinda like, but it gets back to the original point of like these, selection criteria, whether we're talking protection sports and kinda going circling back to that, I think that the final score that dog maybe had when it achieved Schutzen 3 doesn't tell the whole story of that dog, right? And it's, and I think in terms of what you're looking for, you have to rely that objective data exists for a good reason. But in trying to find your horse, it's, that I would rather, when an aggression is such a wonderful emotional state to have to think through when it comes to selection, especially in regard to temperament, because it can manifest itself most oftentimes. And I've always argued this, especially coming from the perspective of an obedience trainer dealing with unwanted aggression that I would say, and we've kind of had this conversation, that the great majority of aggression stems from insecurity. Very rarely are you going to see like proper dominant aggression in the context of pet dogs or even working dogs.
This was one of the things after we had that conversation where I was talking about the Keeler guard dog book that Tony sort of corrected me on as he I think that's the cleanest way I could say it. I think he didn't care for or disagreed with the use of the word like that those dogs were in defense or they were being trained in defense because what he argued was these dogs have a pronounced fight drive and the way that he sort of defines that is the way that he defines that is like your desire for like self-preservation should have kicked in by now. And like
So
you actually like this. And so what he's kind of saying is like we want to have a very clear and good, and I'm paraphrasing now, so I'm still probably going to get some of this wrong. So I'll apologize in advance for that. But
yeah,
basically that like it doesn't take much to get the dog to want to go there, but that they
sure.
still have a very stable, they have a very stable like temperament otherwise. And what he's saying is like these dogs aren't doing this out of fear, which is where it would be coming from defense,
So
right?
so Tony and I, and this is interesting because I didn't know this, and this is probably better left for another day
Uh-huh.
because this could turn into an hours and multiple hours long conversation. But Tony and I probably sit on opposite sides of a very old argument in the protection sports or in the protection dogs. And the term fight drive is very commonly used. I often say fight drive is very much like the word ball drive, like it's a dog trainer word, right? So nowhere, if we're talking drives are survival mechanisms. And fighting isn't not is as far away from a survival mechanism as you could possibly get. Like if you're into fighting in the wild, you're probably not going to be able to pass your genetic material on very. If you're really good at fighting, you might, but to be an animal that wants to just go fight. So I think I always preferred, and I'm not denying the existence of what he's describing. It's just language that I really don't like because I think of I believe in competitive aggression. And I think you can have a dog that's very, very high in prey drive, that doesn't have really any insecurity, that can enjoy the act of fighting because we've basically taken a kid, taken them to karate class and put them in more and more competitive scenarios until one day they really enjoy fighting, but they don't ever have this emotional thing that happens where they experience anger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so on the Schutzen field, especially when the Malinois became kind of the flavor du jour, a lot of the old school judges really didn't like them because they didn't see a defensive picture. They started looking at these dogs and going, they're just uncapped prey with no survival instinct. Like, so they can do, and that's not to us what we wanted. That's not the picture we want to see. And so what they wanted was a dog that was more engaged in the fight and angry. They wanted to see anger. And so I think defensive drive works better because from just a pure language aspect, but that fight drive is somewhere in the channeling between prey and defense.
Do you
Right.
feel the same way? Do you feel this well, I think they've done studies on, like, the parts of the brain that light up when a dog is engaged in prey drive, and that it's different from the ones that are there when it's, like, defensive aggression. So, like, if I'm tearing up a rabbit, it's not the same thing as me tearing up another dog in terms of
Absolutely.
what's being activated.
I mean, I think defense always has to come from insecurity. So it's like we're all going to experience it.
But so do you yeah, I'm sorry, finish what you're saying.
Why defend a resource or yourself if you're not worried about losing your resource or experiencing some sort of damage or harm?
So when you think about something like game dogs, like
Yes.
when you think about, like, dog fighting,
Yes.
do you feel like it's the same stuff in play
I
there?
think you're dealing in yes, I think you're dealing in these things. So when I think of game dogs as like two assholes in a bar, right? Like they're 22-year-old high T linebackers from opposing high schools 4 years ago. And it's like, what is driving that aggression? And to me, it's more of a social stature insecurity, right? Like if you were confident, you would not truly feel the need to fight. And so, and it's not to say, now all this is contextual too, right? So you might be a very confident individual in every other thing, but you get in here now it's that we're dealing in some sort of social complexity that's saying I need to prove something because I'm insecure about something,
Right. I'm
right?
definitely not the right person to have an informed conversation or debate about this, but I would really like to listen to that
Yeah.
conversation
Well, and the thing
be
is I
had.
don't think we ever fall. It's just like everything else. When you get two people that are experienced and have, have a history of dealing in this stuff, usually you are in semantics and you're probably not as far off as you think you are. I personally don't like the term fight drive because I think it's encapsulating something that's too complex to just hang a label on.
And that may have been my language that I just made up too.
Well, it's used a lot. The
I don't wanna
term
necessarily I'm definitely not gonna put words in that man's mouth.
it's yeah, I mean, it's not a knock on him in any way because like there some of the people I respect the most use the term in
Yeah, yeah.
terms of like their ability to train. It's not that. It's just for me, it's like because I always would think of now I want to put a lot of pressure on this dog and I want to see him respond from a place of defense to stay in the fight. But then in order to alleviate the stress he's feeling, in order to be in defense, you have to be under stress, right? And so I want to see that dog be able to channel. And so, like we talked about in the past, like I think very much about the dogs that I'm talking about suppressing in the companion system, where I'm saying, I'm taking you inside, I'm expecting you to deflate and lay down. The more we rehearse that, the better you get at it. A dog that's in a high state of prey, that's chasing the bad guy because it's fun, that all of a sudden has to go into defense because the bad guy now fights back,
We
can
talked
channel.
about we talked about this in one or maybe even two of our other conversations about this. I was talking about, like, the dog Toad that
Yeah.
we have here, where we did so much, like, pressure conditioning to him to the point where I felt like pressure didn't really have a suppressive effect on him anymore, even when I intended it to. So are you kind of the mindset that, like, you built this dog up in those sorts of situations enough that we basically get to a point where there's not, like, that they don't feel
No.
defensive in
Well, I
those
think certain
situations?
dogs may not. Like, certain dogs just don't have the
Keep
capacity.
talking. I gotta hop up for 1 second, but I'm listening. Keep talking.
Certain dogs don't have the capacity for defense. And it's just and we have to try to extrapolate the things that either give them that capacity or don't, right? And it's, and to me, that comes down to some sort of insecurity. And so I think in order to actually truly be defensive in any way, you have to be experiencing insecurity and distress. But you don't have to be experiencing those things to win a Schutzing contest necessarily. So, but certain judges are looking for that. They're looking for the dog fighting back because they're up from a place of anger. And in order to experience that emotion, I would say that you have to have some sort of distress. And then what the broader conversation is here is the ability to channel drive. So what we want is that balanced dog that has a grit to them, that when not only do they perform the correct behavior when they encounter stress, but they perform it from the correct emotional state. And that, so like I'm thinking of a Yak Terrier fighting a raccoon, right? It's not just shaking that raccoon's not prey. If that thing fights back, of course that dog's experience, they're redlining in there somewhere, somehow. And that's not just prey.
We're getting back to this place where the language is not, or like the way that we frame things by trying to isolate them doesn't work because these things are in flux. And so like the
Yes.
Gary
You're
Wilkes
channeling back and
example
forth.
of this is like, see like wolves chasing an elk or something
Yes.
like that. And it's like they're flanking that thing and then that elk turns and tries to gore one of them. And so they have to shift very quickly from prey drive into defense.
Yes.
Right. Kind of right there. They move as an act of self-preservation and then come back. And so he's like explaining how these things are more dynamic and they're not as fixed as we like to talk about. I guess my like to try to summarize what you're saying is like, is the dog behaving the way that they are in those situations that you're talking about in spite of being defensive or because they like in spite of being in defense or because they're in defense? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like
Repeat that one more time.
are you engaging this person
Uh-huh.
because you're concerned about the harm that they're going to potentially do to you or in spite of like
Well,
does that make
sometimes
sense what I'm saying?
if we raise them, right? And so I like drawing the parallel to humans in this one. So it's, imagine I'm a casual to slightly above casual MMA fan. And I like my favorite guys were from 15, 20 years ago when I paid more attention to it. But like I always really liked a guy like Matt Hughes. Right? And so like Matt Hughes was my favorite fighter in the early aughts. And this guy had a really nice wrestling pedigree. He was a great athlete. He was a very well trained guy. He'd been raised up in a wrestling family. So his whole life he's been prepared. Mechanically, everything is correct. He enjoys the sport. He had, 18, 20 years of no consequences of playing a specific game and getting really good at it, where he's experiencing what I would consider competitive aggression. But now the consequences, again, you might hurt, you might break an arm, you might tear something, whatever. That's pretty bad. When you step into the early UFC, you know, where the rules were maybe like extremely dire consequences, right? And you take that to the level of a street fight and it's even more there. But what Matt Hughes is experiencing when he gets in a street fight or steps into the octagon is going to be a completely different experience from you or I, right? Which is, oh my God, I have to survive or whatever else. And so I think we have to think of, especially protection dogs in that way, is we've raised them essentially with no consequence. We're teaching them, hey, the decoy is a playmate your whole life. And then the idea of test day is hopefully that decoy exists as to some degree a greater threat. Now, back in the early days, that was not the way it was, right? So when you read Conrad most of that was that, hey, there's a spooky guy over here that's going to hit you with a stick. Oh, and how do you respond to that? And so I think you're not getting always the best picture. And this was the critique of those early judges when the Malinois really became more and more popular. It's a super high prey thing that didn't experience the stress the way the others did because the prey masked it, right? And so yeah, most people who have dogs that they think will protect them don't understand that they're not dealing with that Matt Hughes that was raised for 18 to 20 years. To when they experience enough stress to enter a different emotional state, the mechanics aren't there. The muscle memory is not there to actually perform correctly.
Okay. Okay. The only parallel I can maybe sort of draw is we talked about in the past about the way that we train, I think is a very obedience based approach. And so I find that when like the way that a lot of people train the dogs that we have, they're really relying on doing a lot of that stuff in drive. So they're introducing tasks by getting the dog in drive and then letting them do things. So I show the dog a duck and then I throw it in the water. And then that's the start of my duck search, is letting the dog basically sight chase a duck or something like that. And how I will do a little bit of that, only enough to see that the dog, I'm testing to make sure that my reinforcer is a reinforcer, right? That my reward is actually rewarding. But then after that, we're developing that stuff in a very much obedience based approach. Like, I don't really do sight chases without the dog having basically lined in the water and then tracked on the water and then producing the duck themselves. And
Yes.
so I make sure that I have the reinforcer in place, and then I am doing the obedience work to show the dog that being obedient to me, to that line, and then being obedient to odor will result in you finding that reward that you want. And I'm expressing it that way because I have found that dogs that we don't kind of teach it from that place where they're not, where they are thinking more and they're not just kind of running on adrenaline, they're able to think their way through problems better at times. Like, I think drive can get dogs into trouble that they have trouble getting themselves out of when it's no longer fun. I've done something and I got into this pickle because I was pursuing that duck, and now I'm all tangled up in some junk. And then now that's suppressed that prey drive. And then now I'm freaking out. I like, I guess I just find that there's times there where, because of the way that that dog was brought into that work, they have trouble sometimes getting themselves out of
And I,
situations.
I think that is an interesting parallel. I mean, we have to now wash out the consequences part, right? Because they're not going to go out there and chase the duck down, and then the duck's going to turn around and potentially kill them. Right? So we're out of fight and aggression talk, I think, in that defensive way.
Yes.
We're dealing here in this primarily prey. And so to use um to use the kind of aforementioned metaphor of like child learning karate, right? It's like it's all in when we're dealing with the like baby kids, it's got to be incentivized play. And then, and then as they get better, they enjoy going to karate class. They enjoy doing all these other things. Then it's like, okay, now we're looking for disciplined mechanical drilling proper, right? And so I may take you out of that. I may let you go out there and wrestle around with kids at first and play and have fun and whatever keeps you motivated to keep coming back. But then I'm going to take you over here and say, okay, now you have to do whatever stuff you have to do. You have to learn it to the point where your body can do it without you having to think about the process. And so for us, maybe that's force fetch. It's like, I can send you out there. When I first put dogs on birds, I have zero expectations. My hope is that they go out there. The fun, the best, the thing that feels the best is when they run out there, chase it down, put it in their mouth, and immediately run back to you with it. That happens. Rarely does that hold up if you continue to do that thing because they're like, "Oh, this is a wonderful resource, and I don't want to share it." Um, but as long as they go out there and enjoy the act, that's all that matters in that moment to me. Once I've given you that access, just like whether I'm doing it in duck search or whether I'm doing it in field work, and you've proven to me that you enjoy it and that you're coming out and I'm having that classical effect of bringing you into drive by walking to the water's edge, now I can go compel all these mechanics over here separately. And then when I bring them back into that context, now we can channel between not where we might have been channeling between drives. Now we can channel into and out of drive, right? If we're doing it, I can alleviate the stress of you having to perform the mechanics correctly by loosening up the reins on allowing the chase to be a little harder or whatever else. Sometimes we may do that. If we see our dog lacking confidence, then we go, okay, you know, bump the bird and chase a little more or do whatever, in
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
struggling to find what it might be in the duck search context, but, or throw another bird out in the water or, whatever else.
I guess what I maybe this is just because when you see different people approaching training differently, a lot of times what you're also seeing is that people have different gaps in their training because of the way that they train. And what I've seen is dogs that are really excited about doing that work until they reach some sort of, it's typically hardship from the environment.
Yeah.
And then there, because none of those kind of like skills that I would use to build it from the start are in place, then sometimes people have trouble helping their dog through those problems. And then where with me, I think we're trying to build the confidence and the desire incrementally along with, and then we already have like those obedience elements in place. And so I just think it's a
And I'm the same. Like I don't introduce duck search at all until I'm done with my force fetch. Right. And so usually in force fetch, I mean, it's all dependent on the dog to some degree, but I would say if they're anywhere, from 25th percentile up in terms of the curve of desire to play with bumpers and stuff,
yeah.
by the time I force to water and work through some lining, and without ever putting game in that scenario, I've got a dog playing a game with confidence.
Okay.
You know what I mean? With non-living things. And so then for me, it's like, then I'm going to just step up my ladder of value from cold game to warm game to live game.
I think that's also what you're saying is very, it's a, I think it's a result of having a lot of retriever training influence, maybe, because what you see a lot of times with people training the versatile dogs is they just use game.
Yes.
And I try to teach most things with like food or bumpers or something else first. Is like we're going to have a technical understanding of this with lower value reinforcers,
Yes.
and then we'll bring those higher value things
And
in
that allow
after.
yeah, I mean, it's like that it gives you so much more of an opportunity to focus on mechanics,
Yes.
right? And it's like I prefer a dog with ball drive, what I would consider ball drive. This is that dog trainer term. So it's like and the Brits, this is a big deal for them, is like they don't work on game hardly at all. And they think that that you're messing up if you do. They're like, once you do, now you can't train with a ball. Once you get a dog that's like game crazy, and I've experienced this at times, that's game crazy. Now I can't focus on my mechanics over here with this lower value item.
I don't agree with that either, though. I
I
think
mean, it's
there's varying levels of that, right? So like the first, I think in an individual training session, like if your dog just was getting after a live bird, it's going to be hard to get them to be interested in food or a toy after that. But you can also see examples, and like the one that I always go back to is Justin Rigney has a video of a dog in a bite box, like he on an elevated surface, and he's asking that dog sniff a glass jar, right? Some scent thing. And then when the dog does that, he marks and rewards, but he's trying to get the dog to take food. And there's a person there with a sleeve. And the dog obviously wants the sleeve. And he, I would say, negatively reinforces the dog to take food instead of, and then pre-max the bite after that.
so yes, okay. So now we're talking about training. We're talking about pretty advanced technical training.
Sure. Yes.
Can I get a dog to take a lower value reinforcer in the presence of a higher value reinforcer? I can absolutely do that. If I'm training in what I would consider a more natural way, right? Then like and my Springer is a perfect example of this. Like I did not expose her to game early. And the same with my new French Brittany, which is the best ball drive French pointing dog I've ever had. And he was not at 16 weeks of age.
Yeah.
But that developed over
Yeah.
time through just exposure and nothing else, to no choices. And now I can walk Billy out in the bird field and have a bird over here planted, get a flush, toss a tennis ball, and get as enthusiastic a retrieve for that tennis ball as it would have been for that shot bird. But that came, I think, through creating value in the tennis ball for so long that it just conditioned the act of like not only the behavior, but also the emotional state of being allowed that reinforcer.
Now, like going back to selection criteria, if you're looking at a litter of puppies, and this is one of the things that we do in our temperament test is throw an object and see the dog's willingness to go after that and pick it up, and then also their willingness to bring that back to you, right? As part of that testing that we're doing at 7 to 8 weeks old, I would assert that again, for most of these dogs with good genetics, if you don't see a lot of that in that evaluation, that's certainly a thing that you can build up a whole bunch. And my evidence of that is like my dog, a lot of times I'm marking and I want to reward her for something, my Munsterlander, and I don't have anything to give her at that time. So like I don't have food in my game vest, I don't have a ball anywhere. And I've had times where I walk back to the truck and I grab a metal food bowl and throw it, and she picks that up and brings it back to me just like it was a toy. I mean, like at this point, if I mark
Yeah.
whatever I fling into the air, she thinks is a toy now. It's like,
And yeah. And I mean, I've done, I know exactly what you're talking about. First in that scenario, there's two things to address there. First, in that scenario, I think I've created enough reward events in the past that that's where praise actually carries meaning. Is like I used to have this argument with the retriever guys at K2 all the time, where it was like my dog only works for praise, and it's like, well, your dog does and it doesn't, but it's because that praise that you're giving that dog in that moment has been associated with probably a primary reinforcer over time. Not necessarily food, but play and prey kind of in their thing. And so for me, if I were in that scenario where I didn't have something to reward with, as long as I'm not overdoing it, that's when one of those, hey, good dog type things and a big love fest can, I think, carry the effect of reinforcement in a real way. But that also means that I have to release to something, or I have to have something there that is truly satiating a real drive at some point. uh, that, and getting back to selection criteria and talking about throwing your metal bowl and having it be satisfying. I don't know if you've ever heard this one. Bart did a video many, 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 many years ago where he talked about selecting puppies. And he's like, yeah, my thing is I just go up and toss my keys, and whichever one picks them up and trots around with them looking like the best. That's mine.
honestly though, man, like every single one of the puppies that we've had, they
Yeah.
pick up metal, no problem.
Yeah.
I don't know where that became like a thing that
Well,
was
it was in a detection thing.
okay.
Because so what happened is at some point in time, I believe it was some federal entity. I can't remember who was the first to do it. It may have been DOD back in the day, but retrieval of a copper pipe became a part of a selection criteria to sell a dog to some certain order. So what ended up happening is like people started force fetching dogs on copper pipes and shit before taking them to the thing. But for the most part, yeah, like you could, with the right dog, you know, with zero exposure, walk out there with a copper pipe, treat it like a tug, and the dog's going to break its teeth off on it for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's kind of dog they were looking for.
Okay. Well, I want to be respectful of time, so I think we
Yeah,
should probably wrap this up. But I
it's been
think
a
in
while.
summary, like what we've actually talked about is you can have a lot of data points for these things, and like a lot of the evaluations that you're doing, whether it's performance, temperament, whatever the case may be, it gives you extra information that can inform decisions. But there's still a lot of stuff that any sort of standardized testing is not going to reveal. And then those parts, that's where this art or like a keen eye or you just having a feeling and kind of knowing what you like is really important,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not going to tell you everything. And particularly when we're talking about the performance criteria, if you're getting a dog from a place where the genetics are solid, then that should almost be a given, right? We kind of both said, like you said, you pick litters now, you don't pick individual puppies. But then where picking the individual dog then matters, I think, is those temperamental pieces,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah.
I
I
want
think,
a dog that hunts, but I also want a dog that I enjoy living with and spending time with when I don't have a gun in my hand.
and I think the things that really get in the way of hunting behavior, the things we're looking to develop, you know, all of the things being equal, it's like I rarely see a dog that's just like a happy-go-lucky dog with no drive. The things I think temperament is the weak point for a dog that could otherwise be the good dog.
That yeah, I think that's a really good way to put that for sure.
Confidence, and it's just, and like I said, we certainly can affect it with nurture, but we can't change genetics too.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's good, and I do think that the term that a lot of people generally use for that would be maybe like nerve.
Yes, then nerve. I use that term all the time.
Yeah, and so like drive is important, but nerve is what allows you to make best use of that drive and turn it into something functional. You think that's a reasonable thing to say?
It is, and I will say this, if I feel like, my selection criteria and this is the reason I breed labs, is because I have an outlet for them. Like, I don't like selling puppies. I'm not, but I do like breeding. I like making money, from selling puppies on occasion, but I don't like selling necessarily to the general public. But for me, if I make a dog that is a dog I can live with and can pass a detection selection criteria from anywhere, then that is going to most likely be a good dog for anybody anywhere. Because really what you're testing at the end of the day, the thing that washes every detection dog prospect out is environmental stability, nerve, right? So if they can walk in a dark room with slick floors and throw down a hard hunt for a ball, hopefully for me, it's a methodical, good hunt for a ball, then that dog is probably going to make a good duck dog, probably going to make a good whatever, dog I need it to be, and has the ability to sell it as a detection prospect.
That's a challenge that we have a lot with our dogs is, I think that the Munsterlander gets looked at a lot like a good if I'm a new person to, like, versatile dogs, to NAVHDA, to hunting in general, then, like, that's a good choice of, like, a new dog, or a dog for a new person, and then we get
Yeah,
a lot because they're good looking, like, they're pretty dogs, then
I
you get
think they're the worst choice for a new person. Like, I think they're a lot, not that they're a lot of dog. I don't think they're the worst person. Let me take that back. I've had some good ones. The one I thought was really good that I told you about back in the day, I'm actually seeing her for a lesson before long. After the last 6 months of us talking, is not the best. She was a very nice bird dog. She was
if you
not a
wanna
very
have a very linear development process for your first bird dog, it maybe not is not the best one for you.
yes.
It's right? So, like, if you wanna be able to just go to YouTube University, if you wanna go watch, like, if you wanna do, like, Upland Institute, or you wanna go watch Standing Stone's videos, or you wanna read a book that was written by any of, like, the NAVHDA judges that have books out or whatever, then, like, that's probably not the dog you should get. Like, you should probably get a well-bred short hair from lines that participate in that stuff all the time, right?
Yes.
Like, that's probably the best one to get. The other thing that we get though, is a lot of people that they feel like, they do surrogate activities, right? So, like, I want a running partner, or I'm really into Fast Cat, or like stuff like that. And I think for us, just talking to people, the other one we get a lot is people that have a specialist. They have a lab, or they have a setter, and they're looking for something a little different. I mean, that's almost literally the quote that we see on our application sometimes. And what I always try to go back to tell people is, again, like, looking at the standards that these dogs are bred to, I don't think that this dog is going to do what you want, because a lot of those setter guys, when we ask them how they feel about their dog running rabbits, they are not happy about that.
Yeah.
And then for, like, a lot of the retriever guys, they're like, I'm going to put my dog through HRC. And I'm like, this dog is going to frustrate you when you want it to take a line and it wants to follow its nose. It's because, like, we don't spend a lot of time forcing that dog to run tight lines for
There's
things.
definitely, yeah, and I've described that as codependence before. So it's like you get this, like, in a good lab should have a level of codependence, and I think a good spaniel too. Like, they should be very concerned about not being engaged with you, where it's like a good setter should be independent. And then it's like a Munchie falls in that spectrum somewhere, but their independence, in my opinion, is, like, more challenging in that, like, once because their desire for game is on a
Yeah.
different scale,
I
right?
think they have, like, yeah, when you look at the specialists, because they have a singular focus, you just don't have as much, they're not reconciling with, like, this internal conflict the
Yes.
same way that, like, these dogs that do so many different things. That's why I think the training is difficult sometimes, and why it's interesting for me, I enjoy it, is
Yeah, I see
because
it.
it's so much different stuff that you're trying to get in one dog. And I think that the dogs that are good at that, they have to be pretty intelligent. And then I think also what comes with intelligence is a certain amount of, these dogs are manipulative to some degree.
I'd say there's a "fuck you" element. Like, that if it doesn't exist, you probably don't have a good one. If that dog's not challenging you at times, not all the time,
Right.
but it's like, because I think you can have that and still have a highly cooperative dog.
And
Like you gotta,
they'll make you a sucker a lot of
yeah,
times too. Like the thing I've heard people say before, like the Munsterlanders are soft, and I have not had that experience. What I have seen a lot is dogs that they can give you the sad eyes and they can be pouty, and then they're manipulating you into not doing stuff, right?
and then it's like they're the perfect animal until they're 30 yards away from you.
Yeah, 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 that too. Yeah, for sure. And then we, we're not. I don't think we have a requirement that we'll only sell our dogs to hunting homes. And so, but I think that I don't know that that's a hard requirement for the club so much, but it's like we'll only sell dogs to hunting homes. And to run a dog in a test, you have to be a licensed hunter. And some of that comes from like Germany.
Yeah, it's
And
fair.
like the fact that this is basically the dog's test to get their hunting license,
Yeah,
kind of, sort of is how it works.
yeah. It's
So
interesting.
when we have people that want to do other stuff, our response to them is just I don't think unless I had like a really dedicated like search and rescue kind of home or something like that, that the dog would really be getting a biologically fulfilling outlet in a way that would make that dog fit into that person's lifestyle. Like when I imagine one of these dogs getting taken to do barn hunt or fast cat or agility, all I see is like the dog getting to do all of the stuff that's going to make it go off the rails without any of the control that helps keep it on the track and keep it being like a good companion.
And here's my, and I'll counterpoint that a little bit, is that I think that there are people out there, and I've had enough of these clients at this point to like, that aren't going to give them the biologically fulfilling lifestyle that we're talking about. That a lot of breeders will use that kind of language to say that's you're not going to give this dog what it needs, and therefore you're not going to give it a good home. Where you might give it to somebody that hunts the tar out of it and treats it miserably every other way.
That's
But
true.
but now here's my caveat to that. I think when you're talking about the small Munsterlander, if you're going to be into a breed like that, if you're going to buy one of those, then you owe that breed and that lineage of dogs a reverence. I would argue that if you want to buy a lab, I don't care if that dog is a couch potato, as long as you give it a good life. When it leaves me, I don't care. Like it's great, but I'm not protecting that lineage. The gene pool is so huge that I would hope that you would just neuter it. That would be, I would ask you to just like, hey, make sure that thing doesn't get bred down the road.
Gretchen's over here laughing.
But I do think though that if you're going to buy something like a small Munster, like Munsters, they deserve that, man. Like because it's a fragile lineage, and if you're not ensuring that moving forward, you're keeping the dogs that deserve to be in the gene pool in the gene pool. Like it's not a loss for a great lab to not be bred.
Yeah.
I think it is a loss for a great short or small Munster to not be bred.
Gretchen and I talk about this. We've been talking about this a lot lately, especially with the two dogs that we have here that we're planning to breed, and we're doing AI. And so there's just been a lot of more logistical and monetary investment in this. And the intention is to help expand genetics here. But so that, like, when we're looking at people for puppy buyers, it's like we want the dog to have the home and the dog to be a good fit first and foremost from like just a lifestyle standpoint.
Sure, of course.
Then we would like that we need the dog to have that outlet, so they need to hunt. And then specifically like when we're talking to these different folks, it's like I'm not going to sell the dog to the setter guy that says he's going to try to break that dog of rabbits, because what you're telling me then is the dog's going to be consistently punished for a thing that they're genetically selected to do, which is just a level of incompatibility that I can't stomach.
Well, it's
Because I
in
think
that,
that leads to what you just said. It's that quality of life issue there for the dog.
and
And
there's a
then
slippery slope to that, which is it starts with you want it to be like your setter, and then the guy in the woods with you likes that dog, and then 2, 3 generations down the line, it's in the AKC
yes, and the other piece is because of the strict requirements for breeding, it's like every person that we're trying to bring in, we kind of like I don't really want to sell you a puppy. What I want is for you to join my cult. Is really what I need, because if you don't drink the Kool-Aid and you don't say, I value this system enough, I like the dog that the system produced enough to participate in the system, then we do end up having that dog that those genetics are kind of
Absolutely.
lost, or we don't ever get to know if they were good or not really,
Yeah.
because you're not doing the stuff they're supposed to do. And
Yeah. I
then
mean,
and then that leads to the other problem that you see, and this is getting cracked down on in all of the clubs, but you don't have to look far in a lot of American bred wire hair pedigrees to see Vom such and such, or in a short hair pedigree to see DKs, or to see, you know, we've had people go as far as like kind of lying a little bit about things to be able to import a dog, and then they're breeding it to American bred small Munsterlanders. And so like you see those things happen, and then my opinion of that, and this is, we've talked about this before about just philosophies on how we feel about breeding dogs, is I agree with the American ideal that I should be free to do whatever I want. But I'm voluntarily participating in this organization, and when I enter into a contract with the person that I'm selling the dog to, part of that contract that they voluntarily enter into
yeah,
is they're not going to do that.
you're going to join my cult.
Right. And so, or at least you're not going to take my
Yeah.
dog and let it
Yeah.
go do stuff with a different colt. Right.
And I understand that. And I guess the American part of me is just the part that's like too lazy to be in the cult, right? Like
But I think, but I don't think it's much of an argument to make to say that like there a lot of there's American wire hair breeders that are breeding good hunting dogs that have probably improved upon temperament. And then uh I just think that for me, when I'm looking at that stuff, I still feel like those people, given the way our systems are, and if it depends on how open people were on at the time when they acquired that dog, but to me, some part of me feels like you are appropriating genetics that are a product of a system that you are not willing to, you value it, but you don't value it enough to participate in it, but you are willing to take it and use it for your own purposes, and that bothers me.
yeah, and I'll say it this you don't need those systems to have good hunting dogs,
Correct.
but you need those systems to produce consistently over time the specific type of dog you're looking to produce. Outside of those systems, and I would go as far as to argue you don't have a small Munsterlander that's bred outside of that system. It becomes something else. And if you want to call that an American small Munsterlander, that's fine. But a German wire-haired pointer is not a DD. A GSP is not a DK. And I believe that. I respect those colts. I respect what they produce. And then it goes to like, what do you want from there? Like, so if you choose to have a GSP, what does that mean to you? Does that mean it's essentially a really good bird dog, which I think most people think of them as? Then yeah, I mean, then just get that. It's just essentially, whatever. I won't disparage them any more
No,
than
I,
that.
I, I get, no, I get what you're saying. I guess, and again, this is just, it's a preference thing for me until it becomes where I feel like somebody's doing like a shady business deal. Like I like all dogs. It's just I choose to keep
I
this
agree.
certain kind, and then there's certain like rules of engagement for me for that thing. But I definitely I there's a lot of dogs that I see that are bred outside of my. I've seen some small Munsterlanders, and I'm like, I really like that dog,
Yeah.
right? Or like just different dogs of different breeds. I worked with a Lagoto. I'm doing field work with a Lagoto right now.
That I have never handled one. How do you like?
So one of my training mentors breeds them, and so I've had hands on a number of young dogs, and all of her dogs have different. She sells them to pet homes, but she also trains them to do like different service dog work and stuff like that. So they definitely have they have the ability, they have working ability for sure. But I'll tell you, this little guy that I'm working with, man, we put him out in the field, and he's just like he's crazy about birds.
Interesting.
It's been so much fun to work him. Yeah, but so anyway, I just
Yeah,
like
figured
I
it out.
like all of them, but I like for what I choose to keep in my
Sure.
house, I just like
Well, and
that's
we need them. I mean, people like me, we need to recognize that even though that's not our thing, in order for those to exist, we need people that are into them.
yeah.
Like I will never be in the is it KSM or what's the Kleiner?
Our, like, our parent club is KLMD, and
Okay.
then, like, our North American chapter is KLMGNA, which is Group North
Yeah.
America.
I'll likely never be a part of that, and it's not because I don't want a small Munster. I will probably never own a small Munsterlander, not because I don't respect them and want one, but because I'm not willing to go as far as I feel like I should go if I'm going to get it. Like I feel like, and that's where to me, it's like, that's why it's a nice cop out. It's a great cope to have labs.
But see,
I owe nobody nothing.
we can work around that, Grayson. We could send you a toad. We could send you one with a tail that's too short or it's got an
Well,
extra
that,
tooth.
we may do that. Yeah, you ever at some point in my life that might be a thing for me. Then you know what'll happen is if I get it, I'll be like the president of the KLMD. It was a great chat, man. I enjoyed
Yep.
that one today a lot.
Cool, man. I think the next one, because we touched on a couple things, like when you're talking about the force fetching dogs on copper pipe to get them to like meet this criteria. A talk I want to have, and this was a title of a blog post that a guy named Terrier Man. Are you
Oh
familiar
yeah,
with that
love
blog?
Terrier Man.
Okay,
Fantastic
so
one.
I want to have a conversation maybe next time about the title of his article or his blog post was Cut and Sign in the World of Dogs. And basically what I want to talk about is like the stuff that you see people do or not do when they either don't pass the sniff test, or you're like, that guy's a dog man and I can tell just by the way he picks up poop, or like,
Yeah,
just like
yeah, yeah.
those sorts of things, right? Like the stuff where like maybe what you see doesn't really match up with what you're hearing come out of somebody's mouth, or times where like you can just stand back and you'd be like, I probably am going to pay attention to that guy and I haven't even heard him say anything yet or her
Yeah,
say anything yet, but just the way that they're doing this thing that somebody might overlook
yeah,
is like, I know they've had hands on a lot of dogs, like that
yeah.
kind of stuff.
And that's an interesting topic. Yeah, I'll have to think about it because I always like paying homage to those that mentored me or that I got something from in the past. And I think, yeah, I can find that thing in all of them, you know? So
Yeah.
we'll
Okay.
talk.
Cool, man. Thank you so much for talking to me. I hope you
Awesome, dude.
enjoy your stuff you got going on.
Thank you, bud. Yeah, we're going to have a good time. We'll be back hopefully next week. Just shoot me whatever you got. I'm enjoying this a lot.
I'm hunting grouse in Michigan next week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna be gone. We're going to drop Toad and his brother, well, not like littermate brother, his housemate Kaiser, who's a short hair. We're dropping them off to their
Are they
house.
active social media people? Because I would be very interested in following Toad's.
No, I don't think so. Unfortunately, this guy and his brother, who has another dog from that litter, has Toad's actual biological brother as littermate.
Yeah,
Neither of them are on social media.
of course. I mean,
Uh,
I get it. I respect that 100%. I admire that. I wish I could be more like that.
but because they live close to each other and they both hunt a lot. We've gotten some invites to go with them, so it probably won't be the last that people will see of Toad, but we're going to drop them off, and that's in Minnesota, and then we're maybe going to hunt there a couple days, or maybe work our way through the UP and then back down into the Mitten, which is where we're actually doing like a hunt camp with a small, very small group of people that include a couple other of our puppy buyers. So
All right. Well, you guys take pictures along the way. I'll be living vicariously through you. So
cool. Sounds
have
good.
fun. All right,
Thanks,
buddy.
Grayson.
Yeah, man.
Bye.
Take care.